Like so many others, I was greatly disappointed at what wasn't covered in the ODNI UAP preliminary report. It's that old story of what isn't there is more telling than what is. But after more thoroughly examining the report, a number of things that were there stood out as being important and troubling. So I figured I'd just do a page-by-page analysis of what is there and what stood out to me. Page 2 begins with the standard scope and assumptions boilerplate language. So let's jump down to the assumptions paragraph at the bottom of the page.
Various forms of sensors that register UAP generally operate correctly and capture enough real data to allow initial assessments, but some UAP may be attributable to sensor anomalies.
Presumably, sensor anomalies should be straightforward enough to identify and remedy, given the widespread implementation of sensor technology and its critical importance to the national defense infrastructure. It goes without saying that if some UAP might be the result of sensor anomalies, those same sensor anomalies could misidentify an incoming Chinese, Russian, or other foreign terrestrial threat. Page 3 is where things get interesting. The executive summary begins with the line,
"The limited amount of high-quality reporting on unidentified aerial phenomena hampers our ability to draw firm conclusions about the nature or intent of aerial phenomena."
Just a second. Is that an admission that our state-of-the-art, multi-billion-dollar sensor technology is unable to at least detect and observe strange things like UAP flying around in our skies and oceans? And as far as drawing firm conclusions goes, that's understandable if standard operating procedure discourages the reporting of anomalous UAP activity. But apparently that's more of a socio-cultural thing, which we'll get more into later. Continuing on the page.
But because the reporting lacked sufficient specificity, ultimately recognized that a unique, tailored reporting process was required to provide sufficient data for analysis of UAP events. As a result, the UAPTF concentrated its review on reports that occurred between 2004 and 2021, the majority of which are a result of this new tailored process, to better capture UAP events through formalized reporting.
Why wouldn't the aforementioned tailored reporting process have already been in place, simply for staying ahead and on top of potential disruptive technology from our foreign adversaries? Continuing from the report.
In a limited number of incidents, UAP reportedly appeared to exhibit unusual flight characteristics. These observations could be the result of sensor errors, spoofing, or observer misperception and require additional rigorous analysis.
It's almost hard to believe that the, quote, additional rigorous analysis, end quote, mentioned above hasn't already been conducted. And things like sensor errors, spoofing, or observer misperception could obviously be extremely damaging to national security. But since all these issues are technology-based, it should be a straightforward matter enough to resolve. Moving on.
There are probably multiple types of UAP, requiring different explanations based on the range of appearances and behaviors described in the available reporting. Our analysis of the data supports the construct that if, and when individual UAP incidents are resolved, they will fall into one of 5 potential explanatory categories: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, USG or U.S. industry developmental programs, foreign adversary systems, and a catch-all other bin.
Given that, quote, airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, U.S. government or U.S. industry developmental programs, and foreign adversary systems, end quote, have for the most part already been ruled out, that dumps the vast majority of these incidents into that catch-all other bin, and that is hugely non-trivial. Then we have the following.
UAP clearly pose a safety of flight issue, and may pose a challenge to U.S. national security. Safety concerns primarily center on aviators contending with an increasingly cluttered air domain. UAP would also represent a national security challenge if they are foreign adversary collection platforms, or provide evidence a potential adversary has developed either a breakthrough or disruptive technology.
That UAP, quote, clearly pose a safety of flight issue and may pose a challenge to U.S. national security, end quote, is an obvious understatement, which is all the more reason why UAP should have been given far more attention than they have. Are these hard questions? Continuing.
UAP would also represent a national security challenge if they are foreign adversary collection platforms, or provide evidence a potential adversary has developed either a breakthrough or disruptive technology.
No argument there, particularly if that UAP was non-terrestrial in origin, which historically has been difficult for the national security establishment to acknowledge. Moving on to the page 4 heading.
Limited data leaves most UAP unexplained.
Limited data? I find that a little difficult to believe. What about the NSA and NRO? These agencies are in possession of the most sophisticated and powerful remote sensing and intelligence gathering technology on the planet. They monitor the Earth's surface, atmosphere, and near-Earth orbital space 24/7. You mean to tell me they don't have loads of data from their monitoring? And then there's this interesting tidbit.
Most reports described UAP as objects that interrupted pre-planned training or other military activity.
The question naturally follows, how did the UAP know about these pre-planned training exercises or other classified military activity? It's just another question that needs asking. Now on to that all-important socio-cultural stigmas issue.
Sociocultural stigmas and sensor limitations remain obstacles to collecting data on UAP. Although the effects of these stigmas have lessened, as senior members of the scientific, policy, military, and intelligence communities engage on the topic seriously in public, reputational risk may keep many observers silent, complicating scientific pursuit of the topic.
One can understand technological sensor limitations being an issue, but since when did socio-cultural stigmas become an obstacle to the critical mission of national defense intelligence and data collection? And as far as reputational risk goes, I would have no problem risking my reputation reporting something that I believe presented a serious potential risk to national security. But that's just my personal opinion. This institutional taboo within the national defense establishment is a major failing that should have been addressed long ago. We can only hope that it's not too late to make up for lost time and opportunity. On to page 5.
UAP sightings also tended to cluster around U.S. training and testing grounds, but we assess that this may result from a collection bias as a result of focused attention, greater numbers of latest generation sensors operating in those areas, unit expectations, and guidance to report anomalies.
This so-called collection bias is yet another glaring example of the seemingly deliberate ignoring of pertinent factual data. One has to ask why. And the admission that UAP sightings tended to cluster around U.S. military testing and training grounds only adds substance to that important question. Additionally, there is the substantial factual Freedom of Information Act-based evidence that UAP activity has also been documented around our most secure nuclear ICBM installations. Embarrassing to say the least. Continuing.
The UAPTF holds a small amount of data that appear to show UAP demonstrating acceleration, or a degree of signature management. Additional rigorous analysis are necessary by multiple teams or groups of technical experts to determine the nature and validity of these data. We are conducting further analysis to determine if breakthrough technologies were demonstrated.
The admission that, quote, the UAPTF holds a small amount of data that appear to show UAP demonstrating acceleration or a degree of signature management, end quote, is troubling. One would think that this small amount of data could have been greatly increased simply by consulting with the NSA and NRO. Then there is the following subheading.
UAP probably lack a single explanation. The UAP documented in this limited dataset demonstrate an array of aerial behaviors, reinforcing the possibility there are multiple types of UAP, requiring different explanations. Our analysis of the data supports the construct that if, and when individual UAP incidents are resolved, they will fall into one of 5 potential explanatory categories: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, USG or industry developmental programs, foreign adversary systems, and a catch-all other bin. With the exception of the one instance, where we determined with high confidence that the reported UAP was airborne clutter, specifically a deflating balloon, we currently lack sufficient information in our dataset to attribute incidents to specific explanations.
Gee, you think? Given that 143 incidents of the 144 incidents studied in this report didn't fit into 4 out of 5 possible explanations in the report, that's an understatement. That would put them into the 5th explanation category, the catch-all other category, and that in and of itself is also hugely significant. Moving on to page 6 and the all-important Potential National Security Challenges paragraph.
Potential national security challenges. We currently lack data to indicate any UAP are part of a foreign collection program or indicative of a major technological advancement by a potential adversary. We continue to monitor for evidence of such programs given the counterintelligence challenge they would pose, particularly as some UAP have been detected near military facilities or by aircraft carrying the USG's most advanced sensor systems.
Excuse me, have they been asleep? The only reason I can see for such a fundamental and potentially harmful disconnect is that this has been deliberately inculcated into the national defense culture. The question naturally follows, why? Is it a situation of, if you see something that cannot be explained, don't? Moving down to the bottom of the page.
The UAPTF has begun to develop interagency analytical and processing workflows to ensure both collection and analysis will be well informed and coordinated.
One would assume that the kind of cooperative interagency analytical and processing workflow environment mentioned above would have already been in place, given the ongoing threat from hostile foreign states and actors. Moving on to page 7.
The majority of UAP data is from U.S. Navy reporting, but efforts are underway to standardize incident reporting across U.S. military services and other government agencies to ensure all relevant data is captured with respect to particular incidents and any U.S. activities that might be relevant. The UAPTF is currently working to acquire additional reporting, including from the U.S. Air Force, and has begun receiving data from the Federal Aviation Administration.
The first line of this paragraph really stands out. What about the U.S. Air Force? Their primary mission is protecting the airspace of the United States. Is the lack of data from the Air Force in this preliminary report due to the authors of the report not doing due diligence in trying to obtain such data, or the failure on the part of the Air Force to gather, analyze, and report UAP data? Or is it something else? Then there's this interesting paragraph.
In addition, the FAA continuously monitors its systems for anomalies, generating additional information that may be of use to the UAPTF. The FAA is able to isolate data of interest to the UAPTF and make it available. The FAA has a robust and effective outreach program that can help the UAPTF reach members of the aviation community to highlight the importance of reporting UAP.
The FAA has an enormous and comprehensive civilian and commercial flight monitoring and control network. Why haven't the FAA's powerful data collection abilities been given careful consideration before? Might that also be due to that troublesome socio-cultural stigma factor? Winding up on page 7, we have the following.
Expand collection. The UAPTF is looking for novel ways to increase collection of UAP cluster areas, when U.S. forces are not present, as a way to baseline standard UAP activity and mitigate the collection bias in the dataset. One proposal is to use advanced algorithms to search historical data, captured and stored by radars. The UAPTF also plans to update its current interagency UAP collection strategy in order to bring to bear relevant collection platforms and methods from the DoD and the IC.
The first thing that stands out is the phrase, quote, standard UAP activity in the first sentence. Putting the word standard alongside unidentified seems a bit contradictory. What exactly is standard UAP activity? I didn't know there was such a thing. And by the same token, what constitutes non-standard UAP activity? The UAP preliminary report's ends with the following paragraph.
Increase investment in research and development. The UAPTF has indicated that additional funding for research and development could further the future study of the topics laid out in this report. Such investments should be guided by a UAP collection strategy, UAP R&D technical roadmap, and a UAP program plan.
Will the proposed increased funding and R&D effort above help us get any closer to understanding the UAP enigma, or will it be just more public relations window dressing? And will the findings of this UAP R&D effort be transparent and available to the public that funds it? I can't help being a bit pessimistic. Remember, we had something along these lines back in the 1950s and 60s. It was called Project Blue Book, and we all know what became of that. That's why, on a final note, I think it's important to go over the findings of the Robertson panel and its effect on the previously discussed sociocultural stigma surrounding the UAP enigma.
The following is from the National Reconnaissance Office historian, Gerald Rains. In January 1953, H. Marshall Chadwell, CIA Director of Scientific Intelligence, and H. P. Robertson, a noted physicist from the California Institute of Technology, put together a distinguished panel of non-military scientists to study the UFO issue. It included Robertson as chairman, Samuel A. Goldsmith, a nuclear physicist from the Brookhaven National Laboratories, Luis Alvarez, a high-energy physicist, Thornton Page, the deputy director of the Johns Hopkins Operations Research Office and an expert on radar and electronics, and Lloyd Berkner, a director of the Brookhaven National Laboratories and a specialist in geophysics. The charge to the panel was to review the available evidence on UFOs, and to consider the possible dangers of the phenomena to U.S. national security. The panel met from 14 to January 17, 1953. It reviewed Air Force data on UFO case histories and, after spending 12 hours studying the phenomena, declared that reasonable explanations could be suggested for most, if not all, sightings. For example, after reviewing motion picture film taken of a UFO sighting near Tremonton, Utah, on July 2, 1952 and one near Great Falls, Montana, on August 15, 1950, the panel concluded that the images on the Tremonton film were caused by sunlight reflecting off seagulls, and that the images at Great Falls were sunlight reflecting off the surface of two Air Force interceptors.
The next two following paragraphs are extremely important, so pay close attention.
The panel concluded unanimously that there was no evidence of a direct threat to national security in the UFO sightings. Nor could the panel find any evidence that the objects sighted might be extraterrestrials. It did find that continued emphasis on UFO reporting might threaten the orderly functioning of the government by clogging the channels of communication with irrelevant reports and by inducing hysterical mass behavior harmful to constituted authority. The panel also worried that potential enemies contemplating an attack on the United States might exploit the UFO phenomena and use them to disrupt U.S. air defenses. To meet these problems, the panel recommended that the National Security Council debunk UFO reports and institute a policy of public education to reassure the public of the lack of evidence behind UFOs. It suggested using the mass media, advertising, business clubs, schools, and even the Disney Corporation to get the message across.
Those two bombshell paragraphs pretty much sum up the, quote, lack of transparency, end quote, and, quote, sociocultural stigma, end quote, surrounding the unidentified aerial phenomena for the last 70-plus years. In my opinion, there is little reason to believe that this decades-long institutional program of lack of transparency and deliberate public deception will change. But if I'm wrong about that, it would be a good thing.